Hello, and welcome to Nuts and Bolts Physical Inking. My name is Neil Brideau. My pronouns are he, him, his. I run Radiator Comics, and Radiator Comics distributes self-published and small press comic books, graphic novels, and zines. We also publish some comics, including Whit Taylor's series Fizzle, which we're proud to report won the Outstanding Series Ignatz Award at the Small Press Expo this past weekend. So I want to send a big congratulations out to Whit for the award, and my thanks to her for involving Radiator Comics in the production of the comic. This program is made possible with the support of the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, and we're grateful for their support, as well as the support of Oolite Arts and the Miami Foundation. We start every event with a land acknowledgement. South Florida has a long history of stolen land and stolen labor, and that is not an ancient history, and it the effects of which are still felt today. So it's important to acknowledge the indigenous people who have been and continue to be caretakers of the land on which we live and work. Here in South Florida, we live on Miccosukee and Seminole land. The Tequesta lived here for thousands of years and were caretakers of the land as well. It's also important to acknowledge the labor and involvement of African-American, Haitian, Bahamian, and other Caribbean people in the development of South Florida. South Florida's history of stolen land and stolen labor is not unique to this region, and organizations all over the Americas start their events with land acknowledgements. So no matter where you're tuning in from, I'd like to invite you to take a moment to acknowledge the land on which you live and the indigenous people who are caretakers of that land, as well as the history of the land and the people and the violence that has been perpetuated by European expansionism and white supremacy. So if we could just take a moment to quietly reflect on that. Thank you for that, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm delighted to have everyone here. Tonight's event is part of Radiator Comics Studio, which is a series of programs and publications to highlight and support the South Florida cartooning community and connect it to the larger national scene. Today, we're continuing our Nuts and Bolts series, in which cartoonists who have a connection to South Florida talk about their practical approaches to one specific aspect of making comics. And we're sort of in this two-part inking mini-series. Tonight's installment is about physical inking. Last week, if you joined us, you learned about digital inking. And so this week we're talking about pens and brushes being physically applied to ink, or physically applying ink to paper. Some people call that like traditional inking, but that can kind of be a misnomer because people can be physically inking in a lot of non-traditional methods. So we're joined by some really great artists tonight. Eric Bonhomme, Ana Hinojosa, Jayro Lantigua, and Drew Lerman. They'll each give about a 10-minute presentation on their own inking techniques, and then we'll open the floor up to conversation between them and questions from you. And we're halfway through September, which means we're just a couple weeks from Inktober, which you could gather from the name, means that in October, people ink. So it's a challenge that was created by illustrator and cartoonist Jake Parker, but you can really make it your own. The idea is that you ink every day. So they put out a prompt of 31 different items or themes that you can ink on. So you can follow Inktober on the hashtag Inktober on social media. Some people use it as a challenge to like draw a 31-page comic in a month. Other people do standalone drawings. I use it as just like a motivation to get me at the drawing table and putting ink to paper. So whether you're a professional artist or a doodler, you should consider taking up the Inktober challenge. So that's my pitch to you about Inktober. So I'm going to introduce the presenters tonight, and then they're going to take it over. And I'm going to introduce them in the order in which that they will be presenting. So our first presenter is Drew Lerman. Drew is an artist living in Miami. He writes and draws the comic strip Snake Creek, which can be read on Instagram. And the Snake Creek book can be purchased through Drew on Instagram and then also through Domino Books. So welcome, Drew. Following Drew will be Ana Hinojosa. Ana is a Dominican comic artist and illustrator. She makes stories revolving Latinx culture and magical realism. And when she's not sketching in her sketchbooks, she's spending time with her dog, Maggie. Following Ana will be Eric Bonhomme. Eric is a South Florida artist who dabbles in comics, pinups, and the occasional dose of fan art. He grew up on Euro comics and dungeon fantasy games, and his edgy yet dynamic art style reflects this. So welcome, Eric. And then our final presenter tonight will be Jayro Lantigua. Jayro is a Miami-based cartoonist. His work includes Burnt Comics, Hurt, and Smack Rat Alley. Jayro's comics touches on dark themes such as mental illness, suicide, depression, existential dread, paranoia, and more. He masks these themes with humor and anthropomorphic characters that at times appear harmless, but the work is clearly not for kids. So welcome, Jayro. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to hand the presentation over to Drew.
Thanks so much, Neil. As always, I'm so appreciative to Neil and what he brings with Radiator Comics to our community here in Miami, and also just the larger North American and global comics community, but especially here in Miami, where I think a lot of us who've been around for a long time have always kind of hoped that something like Radiator Comics would happen here, and so it has. So for my presentation, I'm going to share my screen for just a sec to show you guys all a few, just a few of my strips, just so you can see a little bit of my, sort of my style and my approach, and then kind of launch into a few thoughts. So here, let's see if this works. Are we sharing? Great. Okay, so here's a few strips I've done recently. I'm not going to read them or spend too much time on them, but just so, as I speak, you have some sense of what my, approach and style is. This is from Snake Creek, which used to be a daily comic. Now it's more like weekly. Hopefully it'll be daily again one day. And it's a comic, as Neil mentioned, that I serialize on Instagram and then collect into books. So that's a few recent ones. You kind of see a little bit of what my work looks like. So, all right. My screen is no longer shared. So to explain my method of inking, I think it'll probably help to take a step back and, talk about sort of what my goals are with making art more generally. Probably like most of you, I've always had an impulse to, to make art and put things out into the world. But there came a time when it stopped being fun because my obsession with needing it to be good or great just kind of sucked all the fun out of the process for me. And I had to kind of do, sort of a lot of, just searching for a method that worked for me. And so now my goal with art, I would say, is, I want to put something into the world, and I want to have as much fun as possible while I'm making the thing. So, for inking, I want that experience to be as close as possible, to doodling. Just drawing to pass the time, to fill up a page with marks, with designs and patterns and characters. I think to me that speaks to something that's very basic and human, removed from, the dictates of the market and capital, and trying to make something that people like, and just kind of going back to why you started drawing as a kid. Doodling feels inherently unproductive, and I think for that reason, it is holy. So in case anybody needs to know why you should have fun, why have fun? I think when you're having fun, it shows in the work. Like for years, I would do sketchbook stuff, and my wife, Lisa, was like, wow, your sketchbook stuff is so good and so fun to look at, but your comics aren't. The drawings that I would do in comics just were kind of dead on the page. They weren't alive the way that my sketchbook stuff was. So, at that point I was, scripting and thumbnailing and penciling, and, it just didn't work for me. It wasn't fun for me, and it kind of showed. It felt like a job or like homework. It didn't have that kind of spark of life. As a big disclaimer, I'm definitely not saying that you can't breathe life into a very meticulously planned composition. Obviously you can. I think most people do. That just wasn't what was working for me. So, I just feel like life's hard enough. And when it's time for me to make, making art is not, unlike I think some of the other, folks who are here with us, it's not my source of income. It's not my career. I just want art to be a place where I can be a kid and be free and have reign over my little world and kind of make up the rules. So my point is not don't pencil or don't use a ruler. My point is just what's fun for you. For me, using a ruler is horrible and cross-hatching is really fun. So when I make comics, I don't use a ruler and I do a lot of cross-hatching. Maybe you like using a ruler and you should. As I kind of mentioned, most of the time I do ink without penciling or scripting. So it all kind of happens in that live moment. Obviously, this can preclude you from very complex scenes and compositions. My comic strip doesn't usually require very complex scenes, although sometimes if I have a long story arc going, I'll need to do something. And in those cases, I will pencil. I'm not dogmatic about it. If I just need to know, like, I need everything to fit in this square, I will do it. Usually I'll pencil really loosely, just kind of make little X's where I want everything to go. So also, doing this method when I ink, I don't like to draw slowly and methodically. I don't like the way that my line looks when I'm just trying to put everything in the right place. So I either try to draw on really like fast swooping lines that are kind of somewhat out of my control, or if I want to draw slowly, I'll make it kind of like a wiggly line. So there's still some lack of control there. Something that, my theory about this is like when I try to draw really slowly and methodically, I can only describe it as like an element of cliche just starts to come out in the work when I'm just being slow. And I think it's just from a childhood spent watching lots of corporate media. If I try to slow down, everything ends up looking like Doug Funny or Tiny Toons or something. And I need to like trick myself, somehow to not draw like that. A lot of my methods are just a function of not having that much time. As I have a full-time job, I have small children. I'm comfortable with my life sort of dictating what my method will be. It's the only way I'm going to get anything done to work this way. And so, why not allow that to be part of the aesthetic? It just kind of, for me, I have found that making my art fit into my life rather than trying to find a way to make my life fit into my art has been healthier and led to better art. So that has been sort of, a good realization for me. Another thing I wanted to mention, I think when I ink, I think there's something really profound about laying down the first line in the first panel. Like oftentimes I'll try to lay down the first line as quickly as possible with as little thought as possible. I have no idea what's going to happen, just to try to give me something to like riff off of. From there, everything's just sort of reacting to that first line. Everything needs to hang around it and balance it out. Light and dark, cross-hatching, white space, figures and background, speech balloons, they're all sort of like dominoes flowing from that, first line that you laid down. I'm going to share my screen again because there's a great segue here. There's a great quote that is from the painter Francis Bacon that I think is really relevant. When I read this, it was like very profound to me. So Francis Bacon was talking about this painting from 1946. And he said, one of the pictures I did in 1946 came to me as an accident. I was attempting to make a bird alighting on a field, but suddenly the lines that I'd drawn suggested something totally different. And out of this suggestion arose this picture. I had no intention to do this picture. I never thought of it in that way. It was like one continuous accident mounting on top of another. So, this is one of my favorite paintings. And the idea that this could not have been come to by thumbnailing, by studies, by any method of figuring it out in advance. It happened like live in the moment of creation. So to me, like comics has become in many ways like performance art. Like it's like you're on stage, nobody's there, but it's like you're on stage in front of people and you have to get it right the first time. So like I avoid whiteout, I avoid making changes. If I screw something up, I'll try to incorporate it into the drawing. a lot of it is, as I mentioned, just because I don't have that much time and I just want to get it done. But I also think that it leads and, you know, can lead to really interesting decisions where you screwed something up and it's like, all right, I don't have time to white this out and let it dry. I want to finish it and put it online. So how do I make this, you know, how do I make this thing that I screwed up actually like as if it's supposed to be there? So, you know, from there, I'll just kind of mention some tools I use. Again, like, I like these tools. They're fun for me. So if they're fun for you, you should use them. And if they're not, you definitely shouldn't. So let's see. So some tools I like to use. My favorite tools are, you know, a dip pen. I use this Tachikawa comic pen nib holder and a Zebra Comic G, you know, nib. I use this Yasutomo Black Sumi ink that Hido recommended to me years ago, and I've stuck to it ever since. You know, so those are like my desk tools. They're my favorite tools if I'm sitting at a desk and you know, I have sort of a setup. But sometimes you're on the couch or sometimes you're out in the world. And so for that, I'll use a Micron or a Muji pen or just something with a very thin line that, you know, I don't have to worry about spilling ink on my couch or whatever. Most of what I've learned about drawing is from copying. So I'm just going to show you some sketchbook stuff that, you know, I've done recently. They don't always come out great, but I always learn something from doing these. Just like the way that the light hits this chair is like interesting, or the way that his legs are jutting out and the way his body's angled. I didn't go to art school and I didn't study figure drawing or landscape drawing. So most of what I know about drawing is from copying other drawings. And so that's, you know, I don't do it as much as I would like to, but I feel like most of the good stuff I know has come from that. So, you know, just finding images online or in books, just like, no matter what, I'll learn a thing or two when I try it. I like to copy, you know, because of what my tastes are, I like copying like old etchings and engravings and also, you know, comic stuff. So like I think these were from some Van Gogh etching, and, you know, this is Crazy Cat, greatest comic, Popeye. You know, I like also kind of juxtaposing those together in a sketchbook just because, I don't know, they're all kind of just using pen and ink. And here were some from Rembrandt that I had copied. And these were charcoal drawings from this old weird book that I bought at the Miami Book Fair a couple years ago about like unions or something. They were in charcoal. I decided to do them in cross hatching. Anyway, I've just found that because I work so spontaneously, the more practice that I have with copying drawings, the more that's sort of in my arsenal when the time comes to like make that performance. Like, oh, I've drawn this house a bunch of times, so I can just kind of stick it in the background here. So that's really all that I had to say. And thank you very much. I will stop sharing my screen.
Great. Thanks so much, Drew. That was like, I feel like that was a great entry point for this conversation because it is, you were so much into like play and performance and fun and like finding the thing that like somebody wants to start inking, like doing the thing that feels comfortable for them. Like stressing that sort of method. So that was really great. So thank you. Our next presenter is Ana Hinojosa.
Hello. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Let's see. Oh no, sorry. Here we go. So you already introduced me, so I don't have to do this part, thankfully. Yeah, let me just get right into the meat of everything. I really wanted to start from where I started, just because I beginning material that I had, and pretty much I started inking around early high school, and my like main weapon of choice was the precise V5 pen, and I used it for practically everything. And I never picked up a brush really. I just doodled in my sketchbook. I did small comics about like being a teenager and like hating everything and just like just all the angst, all of it. absolutely all of it. And most of the things that I read were journal comics, like very simple, very straightforward, like Jeffrey Brown or Liz Prince. That was pretty much like my whole library was like very simple. And then I started getting more into inking. This is a few of my sketchbook pages, and then a comic that I was working on for about a year before heading off to college. And I was still using the Precise V5. You know, like it was like a comfort item for me, but I definitely started using more of like brush, but that was like, I guess like I was using it more as just filling in the dark areas that I wanted just very quickly, so I wasn't just like scratching with a pen the whole time. And of course I was making more comics. I think the only like really frustrating part that I had experience was using the Higgins ink, because it is so watered down and it was just terrible, and I absolutely hated it. And I think that was one of the reasons why I didn't really get into inking with a brush so early on in my life. And yeah. And so when I went to college, I went to the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, and I took my first comic course there because I have comic classes with a bunch of professors who are very knowledgeable and practicing artists as well. And pretty much it opened up my entire perception of like inking, because we pretty much went over like the basics of traditional inking, and that was like nibs and brushes and refillable pens and different inks to buy and paper quality, and how all of those things can pretty much like all the stars align and you just hit like that sweet spot on how you want to work and everything. And so I was doing a lot of different comics, and not necessarily like I would think my best work, but definitely work that like Drew, like you said about your sketchbook, that you know you what is it like like you did something and you're not entirely like fond of it, but you learned something. Like it's kind of like that whole attitude moving forward. But yeah, I was definitely like into reading more like classical comic strips and anthologies like Kramer's Aragot around that time. And so I was just doing a bunch of different stuff. And then of course, like I continued my education. So here's a few other comics. While I was like continuing, I learned about things that I didn't like using, like the nib. Sorry, Drew. And and yeah, I kind of stuck with my pen. And there's a few moments in college where it was definitely challenging to keep the comfort item like of the pen and continuing using it kind of as like my preferred medium, because they kind of push you to try something out of your comfort zone and to really just get digging on discovering what your just mode of inking is. So let me talk about my current inking tools and techniques. So my current inking comics and illustration inking tools, usually I use just a variety of brushes. They can be cheap or expensive, India ink, cleaning brush, and sometimes pens. Brushes are usually round, size 00 to 1, since I tend to work on 11 by 14 Bristol paper. So I think it's like the perfect size to go in and do lots of detail. For bigger brushes, I tend to do sizes 5 to 8 that are also round. These brushes go through a lot, so you definitely I wouldn't recommend paying a lot of money for them. Definitely just get the cheap ones with the bigger brushes, because you're just gonna be just wrecking them completely. So my preferred brush right now is a size 0 Royalty and Langnickel round clear brush with a soft grip. If you make comics a lot, you know how important it is to have a grip on your tool and just making your hand feel as comfortable as you can. These cost around $3 to $4. Definitely my favorite so far in terms of inking with a brush. And my preferred ink is Dr. P.H. Martin Black Star India ink matte. They have really great consistency and coverage, and it's archivable, which is like really great if you want to resell your artwork or just keep it forever and just like look at it from time to time. That's totally fine too. So I wanted to go through the steps of how I ink, and they're super basic. If you don't know how to get started or what to do, or just steps, this is how I do them. You totally don't have to follow me, but this could be like a good starting point to jump off of. So basically I just start with panels, and usually I do thumbnails. I'm kind of like really neat about everything, and so I like to plan everything out. And definitely it's like not for everybody. Just do what works for you. For me, it's just more of like, I'm really into doing a good first pass with the sketching, and so I don't really like do a sketch. I do kind of pencils first, and they're usually really neat, and so it helps when you have thumbnails to do that. So step 2, I take my pen, which is a Uni-ball Vision Micro, and that one's also archivable too, so everything could be totally saved. It's not gonna like look weird in 5 years or something. And I just go over the outline of the border and everything before I start inking. And then step 3, I also use that same pen and I go over lettering. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. I just really like things to be really neat and easy to read. If you want to add, I don't know, the je ne sais quoi to your onomatopoeias in your comics, definitely like go with the brush or whatever else you want to use, just to get like exactly the feel that the word that you're going for too. And step 4, I use my brush, my preferred brush, and I ink everything. This is kind of like the part of my process where I'm like the most concentrated. I tend to listen to instrumental music. I don't want any distractions, because pretty much I'm just going to be figuring out like the line weight, where I need to push harder on the brush, how to dictate where light is coming from to the type of like material something is. Everything all about that I'm constantly thinking about during this stage, and how I'm going to render it out. Usually one page takes about 2+ hours for me, just because I'm really detail heavy, and so a lot of it takes a while to do. So the next part is just erasing underneath the ink. For the longest time, I actually would have 2 sets of copies for each page, the pencil and then the inked on top, and I would use a light box to kind of like show it through. But that is like, it costs a lot of money to have that much paper all the time, and so recently I just started erasing the pencils after scanning them, just so I have like the scanned copy just as a backup, and then I have the ink copy again. So if I do mess up the ink copy, you could always print it out again and ink whatever part you messed up or something. But I'm also incredibly neat, so you definitely don't have to do any of that. And I just want to make that totally clear. Yeah, so also if there's like spots that that get lighter because you're erasing it, I usually go over them as well. And step 6, which is like the best part in my opinion, is filling out the black areas of your comic or your illustration. Head empty during this time, like it's just really aesthetically pleasing, you know, you're just filling them out. It's really great. Luckily with the ink that I chose, the Dr. P.H. Martin India ink, it has really good consistency, like I said, and so I only go over areas once, and then maybe way bigger areas, I go over them twice. And then step 7, you just scan and edit on Photoshop or any program you want, Paint Tool aside, I'm pretty sure you can edit it there. And I convert it into a grayscale bitmap, just so the lines are super crisp when you print them out, or put them with any other color, and then you're done. So these are some of my examples. We had talked about Inktober earlier. These are actually these are some panels from my Inktober comics last year. Yeah, very eerie. Okay, not really the middle one, but like most of them were kind of scary and creepy, or at least I hope they were. But yeah, I was practicing more of I guess like a looser form with my inking with these, because I usually do all this process before even sketching it, and I didn't do that with it. I just went straight with the pencil without thinking about it. Here's some of my other examples of inking. These are a lot older. I think this was like during my years in college. So doing a lot of experimental stuff. I think with the dry brush, I wasn't experienced in that. This is one of the comics that I was like working with it, and it was kind of using it to show like a more gradient, but also like a textured gradient, you know, like because she's in a cave, the character's in a cave, and so light reflecting on stone, that kind of thing. And then I have a person being eaten by a shark. Here's some other examples of my comics. The first one is just a regular ink brush that I had mentioned before. And then the second one right here is actually with a pen that I would not let go of. And that one's like more hatching, but not exactly like the main theme in that comic. Here's some my other examples for illustration. This was like the promo image I had actually done earlier this year, if I'm correct. And then this was an illustration for a magazine that I did before going into college, and I really like that one. So I wanted to also talk about sketchbook inking tools. I don't know if I'm going over my time. I haven't been checking. I'll do this quickly, but so I do a lot of like sketchbook work. It's kind of like I don't know. It's like the perfect ground to experiment. It's where you're comfortable. It's where you're safe. It's where you can mess up and nobody will see it unless you show them. My primary tools, various pen brushes, everything super portable and easy to experiment with. My preferred pen, Uni-ball Vision Micro pens. They're around $16 for a 12-pack online, and they last very, very long. They're super straightforward, deadline pen, you know, so you don't really get different whiffs with the inking that comes out. They're super smooth, and you can draw with Copex on them, and the ink doesn't go everywhere. It doesn't ruin the Copex. For any alcohol marker, brush pens that I recommend: the Zebra brush pens, micro, the one that is pictured right here. The Kuretake brush pens. The second to last one, Bimoji, is the one that I really, really like. And then the refillable Pentel brush pens. And then the sketchbook that I use is the Pentalic Recycled Traveler Size Sketchbook, 8x5. And I've been saying this for the longest time. They need to pay me because I've been advertising them for years now. They're like the best sketchbook I've used. I really enjoyed it. Okay, so here's some examples of the Uni-ball Vision micro pen that I use in my sketchbook. So pretty much like it can go from hatching, so it's just like a study of my dog Maggie, to just like quick sketches of just like observational stuff, or as a simple mood capturing or something. Yeah, they're super versatile, very easy to use, super simple, straight to the point. Here's my other super important brush that I use, the Kuretake brush pen. Definitely one of my favorites. I wasn't sure how appropriate I could be on here, so I put a cabbage where it needed to be. So yeah, you could definitely see the different line weights here. I use it a lot for like hair textures, or doing like little journal entries, and my comics are really nice. Or like the what is it, the third bottom image. Like if you're using another pen, you could also use a Kuretake to like add a little like something to like the edges or whatever, to kind of like give it like a shadowy look and stuff. Or just like studying a quick study of somebody, like the second top row, that's my nephew. I just like, he was just playing around and I was doing some quick figure drawing sketches of him. Here's some other examples. Here's the first 6 figures. They're actually studies from a book, and pretty much like each one was about like a minute long. And this pen is like, I don't know, like it's honestly like my favorite to use, just because you could, it's so versatile with that, just a quick study, but then also legitimately like helping you study your line weight consistency in your other work, and so on. It's good. So tools and technique overview. So most of my inking tools I use for comics and illustration, they tend to lean towards like a cleaner use, where it would help me finish the project quickly and also effectively, so I don't have to like go over inking spots constantly, or having to patch up some areas that I don't really like or anything like that. And then inking tools for Sketchbook, I kind of focus heavily on the fact that they're very portable and that they're good for experimentation and really like expressing exactly what I'm studying at the moment in a very accurate way, and using that in my professional work as well. And of course, both spaces can be interchangeable. Like, you definitely don't have to do this like this. I'm very picky about how I do things. Yeah, if you want to use the Sketchbook recommendations that I have as like a means of making more professional work, go right ahead. It's completely within your right. It would look awesome, I'm sure. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say.
That was great, Anna. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
That was so fantastic. I loved it's such a great like detail, both in terms of like your tools and then also your process. Like, that was really fantastic. And like what the tools were good for. I feel like oftentimes like when I'm inking, I'm like, am I doing this right? So it's like great to hear how other people are like very detailed, like how other people do it. So thank you, Anna. Our next presenter is Eric Bonhomme, and I'll hand over the presentation to Eric.
Hello, can you hear me? Awesome. Yeah. What's up? And those were some great presentations. Mine is gonna suck. So for me, inking is like an expression. It actually makes you more confident in your mark making the more you become attuned with it. I've been inking for so many years now. The more I find myself working with this medium, your marks just become confident. And for a lot of beginners, they are scared of, the harshness of the ink. And I feel like that needs to be put there, so that you can instill in your mind that, yeah, it's going to be a definite mark. So you are a little bit more careful, and you pay more attention to the way you react with the medium. I'm very sporadic. I use a lot of tools. I make sure that I never limit myself into a system, a technique, or whatnot. I'm always experimenting. The advantage of that is that you'll gain that confidence a lot faster. But it's also good to stick to something and then kind of like mix it up, you know what I mean? So it depends on the individual. So I can show you guys some examples and maybe try to talk a little bit about some of the pieces. You can get an idea of where my head is. Let's see, bear with me. All right, so I tend to draw things that are the whimsical realm, mythology. I've been creating my own world for many years now. In this piece, it's a mixture of just finding marks that work, um, creating lines within lines, using tools like whiteout to bring some things out, whether I want something to, have some accents, some attention to the areas, a little bit of details here and there. I'm just letting it be as flowy as possible, adding marks where they need to be. This is another one where this is more about like line weight. I want the focal point to be more towards the head, where there's a bunch of skulls and little details. And I'm not really being nitpicky. I'm just kind of carving into these pieces while I'm creating. So I'm never really limited. So let's say, a portion of like the jacket turns into something else. I'll just let that kind of be, and then I'll make it work for the situation. This one's a little bit more confined. I found the shapes of the figure, and then I decided to just kind of block it in with some bold blacks. And then you can really see where some of the points of interest are. And this one, it's a little bit, pinpointing. There's, some, I like using harsh blacks to kind of put you in an area with a harsh contrast, so you can see the point of interest, and then having your eyes move around the pieces, and you can see all the little intricacies that are going on. This one's more of a this is a newer approach that I've been experimenting. It's a little bit cleaner. It's still a work in progress, so I don't really have too much more to say about this one. This is a sketchbook entry that, again, it's just finding a shape that works, and then highlighting what's around it. Keeping that energy. Speaking of energy, just a lot of the white lines, it's whiteout that I use to just kind of peel out. I don't just use the ink. I'm not really a purist at it. I'll use whatever works. I use a lot of blades to chip into the ink, to rub it off. So if you actually see the paper, it's really beat up. I use sand erasers, which can, blend into the ink, where you can have like a nice gradation of a fade. Create some really fun stuff. Some more, mythology stuff that I've been working on. Expressive pose, expressive lines. Trying to have fun, like that's another thing. I'm trying to really enjoy myself when I'm making these pieces. You almost lose yourself when you get into that flow of things, and when one part works, you're just like really excited to get another portion of it. I tend to not work in one area. Like if I were to start in the face, I would move along to maybe the foot, to ground the character. Maybe also it lets the piece dry as well, so that you don't accidentally smear, which is also fine if that happens. Some more mixtures of like, breaking it in with the white, bold contrast. This one's, using halftone, cutting out little zip tones, sticking them to the paper, drawing on top of it. Yeah, I'm just not being too careful. I'm going over the lines, and that kind of creates an animated feel to the characters. Let me see. So that one, and I have my, so this is my supplies that I use. Wait, I got the wrong one, sorry. There we go. So there's a variety of tools that I use. A lot of brushes, a lot of different widths. You can see that, right? Okay, cool. Towards the top, those are like my blades, X-Acto knives, nibs, mini screwdrivers, sharpeners, sand erasers, and then there's a variety of brushes. I like the Winsor Newton Series 7s, the Isabe line. Those are a bit pricey, but I find that those last me the longest. I have also a variety of like cheaper brushes to create a lot of different marks. Here I have like 4 inks that I use. We have the green bottle Sumi, and then we have, you know, the Super Ball from Speedball. I have a Kuretake black bold here. And then in the middle, there's, I made my own ink, like from different inks, and mix them together to create like maybe a clumpier ink, something with some texture, you know, be really experimental with that. And on the bottom, there's a bunch of calligraphy inks, Kuretake brushes, Pentel brushes. If you like to ink, you should check out Jet Pens. That has taken so much money from me. It's an amazing place, and there's a bunch of stuff on there to experiment with. So yeah, this is like a portion. I wish I had another photo of like, you know, a lot of little, what do you call those things? Little coasters and Petri dishes that I mix up the inks, some with different values. Sometimes I'll dip in like a Copic marker because the tip is, you know, a little bit smoother, and I could get like a cool mark with that. But yeah, that's my process. My tools. Let's see. And I feel like if you're just starting off with ink, you know, start really slow. Just getting a lot of, you know, crappy paper, figuring out what kind of paper you like to apply the ink to, because you're going to notice that some pieces of paper are going to clump, some aren't. A nice trick to that is to gesso one side so it's nice and hard and stiff, and then it could actually, you know, keep your surface nice and flat. But be very experimental, you know, go out in the yard, get some sticks, bring them back in, dip them in the inks, try like a lot of different marks. That's essentially what a lot of digital brushes are. They're just things from nature that you just kind of input in. Yeah, and have fun with the medium. It can be very forgiving once you get a hold of it. So don't be scared. Sketchbook, scrap paper, whatever, it doesn't really matter. You know, as long as you're just enjoying yourself, it's going to be a good time. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
That was great, Eric. I loved, yeah, that was such like a welcoming, like encouraging people to just experiment. And like, I love that idea of ink, like the difficulty of controlling ink is what like, and like working with that like leads to confidence. And then also the idea of like inking not just being an additive process, but can also be like a subtractive process when you incorporate like blades or like whiteout. So that was really great. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so our final presenter for the night is Jayro Lantigua, and I'll hand the mic over to Jayro.
Can everybody hear me just fine or no? All right, great. So I don't have a PowerPoint or anything exciting like that, so I apologize in advance, but we're going to cover two things, right? For those that like to ink via analog by hand, we're going to cover that. And we're also going to cover digital inking for those that ink digitally. I do both, and it's been pretty fun for both ends, but let's cover the analog. Okay, by the way, if you have the view on the whole gallery thing, you might want to go ahead and do the thing where you're like, it just focuses on the screen, just because I'm going to show some stuff. I'm going to hold it up. Fair warning though, some of it might be a little bit on the violent side, because I do adult comics. So just a heads up in advance if you don't want anybody seeing it or anything like that. And if if there's still kids in the room right now, it's too late. So here, check this out. So I do a lot of inking with black, and I use the Yatsumoto black ink. This stuff is really opaque. It's really strong. A lot of my inking, I like to do silhouettes, mess around. And all these marks, I generally do through a Winsor & Newton Series 7.3. I use this primarily as my main go-to. That whole page I pretty much did with this. And I like using it because a lot of people are used to having the pen, the Copics or the Microns, that they use a dead line. And that's great, which, it gives you a little bit more control, gives you a little bit more tighter ink, and that's awesome. But the one thing about it is that you do find yourself having to switch between pens to get different thicknesses of lines and whatnot. So with the brush, when you learn to do that and you learn to use the brush, it actually helps, because you just tame that line and you're just making all kinds of cool stuff with it. You can go different thicknesses and all that stuff, and it just makes life a little bit easier. Now, regarding tools though, I noticed that a lot, we were all presenting the inking and stuff, and it covers a lot of bases. But one thing that I didn't hear, which was important, is that this guy right here is the equivalent of your undo button if you're digitally inking. And what does that mean? Okay, when you ink, right, for some people, it's nerve-wracking. And for that, it means that, and by the way, in advance, I did mention that I do adult comics. I also curse like a sailor. So if I curse a lot, I'm so sorry in advance. But when you fuck this up, you use this, right? Because you don't want to go ahead and ink and be like, oh man, what do I do now? Do I just throw this whole shit away? No, you use this. You just go right over it, give it count till 10 Mississippi or whatever, and you're in. You're good to go. Now, with inking, there's a lot of different techniques. There's cross-hatching, there's feathering, there's all kinds of ways to make different marks and express things. But a lot of the things that you do, you use certain techniques to create certain intentions. Okay, coming back to this, right? So this right here, the reason that I decided to use all black here for this sequence was to show an action sequence of it happening. And yes, the blood is usually black like I do here, but I wanted to create focus on this image, so I didn't black out this panel like I would have here. That kind of distracts the eyes. Here, I want to show motion, and in blacking it out, it creates a much easier fluidity to it. So, you feel more comfortable watching it. You're seeing a little bit more focus on what's going on, and there's nothing around you to distract you. Silhouettes and all that good stuff, that's all stuff that you pick up as you go. Now, tool-wise, I use a variety of different things. So the Pentel Pocket Brush, it's a pretty nifty little tool. For those that have used it, you know what I'm talking about. For those that haven't, this is a great tool because it works like a brush, like a sable brush. There's a cartridge that you can put here and you could refill it whenever you need. It's great for sketchbooks, drawing. I like using it when I have to black out a lot in a panel or do anything like that, because I hate dipping and blacking out like that. It takes forever. I do have pens. I do use them too. It's not like I don't. But I use these. These are Winsor & Newton brand pens. They're kind of like Copics or Microns. I assure you, they're not like better or anything like that. It's the same crap. But the thing is that you want to basically, find a pen that works for you. I find that these are a little bit more agreeable with the tooth of Bristol, which the tooth is, for those that don't know, it's the texture of the paper as you're drawing. Sometimes you'll see that the paper might catch your pen. You might get stuck, or it drags, or you feel like you're scratching the paper, which one of two things is going on there. Either the pen sucks, the paper sucks, or the combination of the two suck. And you just got to find the one that works for you. I use this as well. It's Le Pen. I don't know. I thought it was going to be like a fancier pen. Turns out it's not. And it's good. It works, but it's not really like a big deal. You know, at the end of the day, it does the same job. So one thing I am going to emphasize, the tools don't necessarily matter as much as it is the person using the tools. But I am going to say one thing though. With regards to brushes, you want to get something with good sable on it, because if you get those really dry ones that are like for, I don't know what kind of paint that is, they feel like house brushes, you know, the ones that you're just like painting walls with, like you're never going to ink like finally with that. It's going to be a pain in the ass and you don't want to deal with that. So finer sable, stuff like that, that's great. Now, if you're using brush, get yourself one of these. This is a brush cleaner. I usually use it in combination with hot water, so I keep it nice and clean. But this keeps your brushes in good condition. And when you buy a pricey brush or anything like that, you really don't want to let that go to crap, because it's just going to hurt. Like, I had to buy another one of these, and trust me, like, I felt it, because it was like, shit, man, like, I feel like I'm going to screw that one up as soon as, like, I start using it, because I'm just, like, a mess with inking. But overall, yeah, I do a lot of different things. I'll show a different sample of inking. This is another one where I'm basically working on 11 by 17 Bristol. As I go, I'm creating, you know, shadows. I'm not afraid to just kind of black things out, which that's another thing. And it's a weird philosophy, but it's something that's worked in like people that have worked on the big two and stuff. I never have, so really just don't quote me on that. But when in doubt, black it out. You know, like if you don't really know like what I want to put there or anything like that, just black it out, dude. It's just really not a big deal. At the end of the day, you just want to convey what you want to convey. And if there's any superfluous details or any negative space that bothers you, do what feels right. I ink based on instinct, and I don't do anything else that's like out of this world for it. I just kind of spot blacks as I go. Sometimes it's good to kind of get the paper and just step away from it and look at it and just see, you know, like, man, it could use a little bit more, you know, like it could use a little more blacking out on this panel. This doesn't work for me. Things like that. Like, take a moment, you know, and don't feel afraid to just like walk away from the piece and just come back to it like 20 minutes later, like take a break, have a beer or something, and just like look at it and say like, shit, you know, like I really needed to add this, or this makes more sense now. It's okay to do that. You shouldn't feel like pressured to have to knock that all out. So I feel like I've touched, you know, sufficiently on the analog part of it. Basically, I use brushes, pens. I like using brush for everything. But let's go to the digital side, right? And here's what we're gonna go ahead and do. I use an iPad Pro 11. That stuff, it's pretty nifty. I use an Apple Pencil. I do use Procreate, but one of the things I did with Procreate was that I used a program called TrueGrit that allows you to have more, God, I feel like a ridiculous ad, but whatever. You get different nibs and pens and tips and all that good stuff, and it creates different textures, zipatones, all that stuff. I know I had a lot of fun using it when I got it, because I was making a comic for The Sopranos, and it was just like a blast, like drawing Tony and like old zipatones and making him all look, you know, ridiculous and stuff. But enough of that. So back to this. Here's like an example, and I know, Jesus, like that. Okay, there you go. We'll just handle it at this angle. Inking like on this level. Let me see if I could lower the vibrancy on that. So if you could see that, here's an example of me and what I'm doing with the inking digitally. This is an old, this is a rendition of, I think it was Stoned Again or something like that. It's a Robert Crumb piece that I renditioned back as Bored Again, instead of like Stoned Again, or, you know, some people call it High Again. And, you know, with inking digitally, you just have to find the marks that work for you. I had to find nibs, digital nibs, with the Apple Pencil that worked for me, and I just went ahead and did that. It is a transition. It's a weird transition for some people, but honestly, it feels very familiar. It depends on how you do things. Like, for example, Drew does a lot of cross hatching, right? And I don't do any cross hatching. So in my situation, like, it feels a little bit more comfortable not cross-hatching with the Apple Pencil. You really, like, the nibs are so good for cross-hatching, which he knows what I'm talking about. And, you know, it's just like, it changes things. But your inking style, it really determines like how you kind of approach the digital. It's a good transition. have fun with it, experiment. It's an easy transition. It's just something that you just have to just go for it. Don't be scared of doing things like what Eric was alluding to. You just have to have fun and build confidence. And the more you doubt yourself when you're moving into like inking or anything like that, the more likely you are to make mistakes or just pieces that you're not into. And it's not about that. It's about doing stuff for you. Common mistake a lot of people do when it comes to making comics or cartoons is trying to make something that will garner a readership. Like people are like, oh man, I really want to make this that's popular. Like, fuck that. Make something for yourself that you enjoy and the kind of comic that you want to read. Ultimately, there's you're not the only person that has your mindset, and do your thing. But last thing, and I'll be done. Penciling, I pencil with a red pencil. And the reason being is that when you scan it, it just separates the black right away, and there's no need for erasing or anything like that. It makes it a lot cleaner and a lot more comfortable. And there's no more like retouch-ups and stuff like that. But overall, thank you for listening to me rant, and thank you, Neil, for this opportunity. And that's a wrap for me. So thank you very much.
Cool. Thanks, Jayro. That was great. Those are a lot of really great advice and a lot of like really great detail. And so I actually was going to paste into the oops, I think I have to do this into the chat. I think Eric mentioned jet pens. There was a lot of like terminology that was thrown around tonight. So if anybody wants any clarification on any of that, please feel free to ask any questions. Again, if you have a question, we're now in the Q&A portion of the event. You can either click the raise your hand button in the participant section of the Zoom screen, which is down at the bottom, or you can type your question into the chat and I'll ask it for you. So I guess one thing that I wanted to ask each of you, and maybe we will go in the reverse order of the presentations, is who are an artist or two that you are that you feel like your work is in conversation with, that you would recommend other people take a look at, who you think are like using ink in a really interesting way? And start with Jayro, if you, not to put you on the spot.
So as far Oh, no, it's cool. So as far as artists are concerned, if you want some really fascinating artists when it comes to their inking, I would greatly encourage looking into Fletcher Hanks, looking into Basil Wolverton. Wolverton's art is just fascinating. If you want to see some real masters like Charles Burns, like check him out. He does some phenomenal work. I mean, there's a wide array of them. I really enjoy. And my work, like one of my greater influences for me was Carl Barks, which, believe it or not, like, he's the guy that does Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge. Like he to me was one of my, like, all-time favorites when it came to that stuff. And the old Terry Toon comics like Mighty Mouse and stuff like that. Daniel Close, if you guys already know that, and just a bunch of others. But definitely check out Charles Burns, Basil Wolverton, those guys. They really, they're a game changer. They'll put things in perspective, and you'll see some amazing stuff. Steve Ditko does some great stuff as well, and the old Harvey Kurtzman comics and stuff like that, and anything from EC, like back in the day, that some impressive inking right there.
Cool.
But yeah, that's me.
Thanks. And then Eric, do you have any recommendations for artists for people to check out? I think your microphone is off currently. Is that Paul Pope? Eric, your microphone is off. So if you want to turn your microphone on.
Am I good now?
Yes, yeah.
All right, sorry. Okay, Paul Pope, amazing illustrator, comic book dude. Like, let me see if we can, no glare. Like, just the amount of variety he has in his inks has been, pretty influential in my career. And to go back a few, decades, you have Henri Clay. He does a lot of So you can see that on each clay. He has 2 volumes. There's 1 and 2. Like he does more of like things with the nib, just a lot of very expressive drawings. You know, just I mean, if you do a search, you'll find them. There's definitely Jordi Bernay, Alex Toth, Jack Kirby, Ashley Wood, Kim Jung-ji. These are just names that are coming to my mind for inkers. Nathan Fox. Who else? Yeah, there's a bunch. Once you lock down those guys and gals, it's just gonna spread. You're gonna see like who's influenced them, and then you're just gonna go in this perpetual rabbit hole, and it's never gonna end. Who else? On the top of my head, Katsuya Tarada, Japanese artist similar to Kim Jung-ji. Yeah, it's about who I know right now.
Cool. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Well, I have to cross out 2 of the people I wanted to mention already. Well, one of my favorites is definitely Charles Burns. I love his work. Like, I actually got one of my comics that I have that he made. I was like begging a teacher to get him to sign it, and she did, and I have a signed copy, and I love it so much. But Charles Burns, definitely. Alex Toth. I really like Jillian Tamaki. I don't know if with Skim, and then This One Summer, like her inking is just so beautiful and like so rendered, just I don't know, it just looks very natural. And Jeremy Sorzies.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, but he had made Curveball, a book called Curveball, and it's just his illustration work and his comic work is just like, it's so abstract and beautiful, and I definitely recommend reading it. And Jaime Hernandez, I really like his work. It's very neat. I can relate to his his process with inking a lot. Yeah, it's everyone that I could name off the top of my head right now.
Cool. Those are some great suggestions. And then Drew, do you have?
Sure. Yes. So I guess specifically from an inking perspective, I mean, I mention this comic all the time, but Crazy Cat is just the best. And George Harriman's line and the way he uses ink is just so, I don't know, it's really inspiring, and how much expression he gets in these tiny little marks on a page. You know, this little cat and mouse and dog that are always shown in like a, you know, full body shot, so you never really get a close up on their face, and yet somehow there's so much expression in these weird little scratchy lines. And I know that something that he does a lot that I guess later in his career that I want to learn how to do one day, which Eric mentioned, is sort of using blade and whiteout more, not as a way to cover up a mistake, but as a way to, you know, as Neil kind of mentioned, like to add by subtracting. That's something I want to learn how to do. I know Harriman does a lot of that. Gary Panter is hugely important to me as an artist. The way that he balances the crudest, almost childlike looking drawings with the most beautiful, ornate, elaborate cross-hatching and composition. You know, his Jimbo comic book series that has culminated in these like huge, grand gold leaf books. The first issues look like they're just scribbled out, like really, like I was like, how do I read this? But then they're so funny and good. And then when you like go through, by the end, they're like, you know, incredible, like etchings almost. I really love Ben Ketcher. His stuff he uses a lot of like nice ink washes that are a little more delicate than someone like Panter. But the way that he composes scenes with ink, I think he's also somebody that doesn't pencil in advance, but he, you know, his angles are so strange as opposed to somebody like Harriman, where it's always kind of like a vaudeville show with these two characters or three characters in the same kind of size. Like Catcher has all these strange, bizarre angles that you're like on a very elaborate stage or something. And then finally, I would say Josh Baer, you know, he's hugely influential to me. His stuff is really messy, but really amazing. Just his knowledge of light and dark and figure drawing. I mean, I think he could spend like 18 hours on a page, which is, you know, and it shows like all that labor is incredible. He posts tons of his process stuff on Instagram, and it's just like a masterclass in cartooning, watching Josh Baer's like just Instagram stories and process and stuff. So I would mention those artists as ones that when I'm inking and thinking about inking and drawing, I'm definitely very conscious of. As far as other contemporary artists who are great at cross-hatching, I would also mention Emile Ferris. Her book, My Favorite Thing is Monsters, has like insane cross-hatching. It's so gorgeous. And Laura Park also is a insanely masterful cross-hatcher. Just looking at any of her works, I just am like, there's breathtaking. So those are a few that I would mention.
Great, thanks. We do have a question. When you all started inking with a brush, what are some exercises that you did to practice creating consistent line quality? And the writer says, the thing that makes me avoid brushes is my inking. In my inking is the lack of control.
Okay, so I'll just jump in. So with the brush, what I started using is I started inking on a sketchbook, and I would not draw, like I wouldn't use a pencil to create the image. I would just force myself to create images with the brush, no matter how crappy it looked. And I just kept doing that, trial and error. And yes, it is a little tedious at first, developing control of it, but it's, you know, as cliche as it sounds, it's all in the wrist. I mean, you just gotta kind of go for it and just not be afraid. You know, just get the pencil, get a sketchbook, keep a sketchbook. At the end of the day, your sketchbook is not something you're supposed to just be like flaunting around and stuff like that. Like I work big with the brush. I'll use an example. Like I use, you know, I got one of these guys. Like I work big on this, and I just ink on this all day, or I draw on it, and just use a brush. Use a brush, freehand it. If you've ever, you know, it's just one of those things. Like, for example, I don't know if anyone here has ever read Burn Comics or has ever seen it. If not, it's on the Big Cartel. You could check it out. But I freehanded that whole thing with a brush. Like, I didn't pencil that. So it's just practice, practice, practice. I can't emphasize that enough. Like, just draw every day with a brush. Don't, you know, don't second guess yourself. Just keep doing it. If it looks bad, go to the next drawing. Don't throw anything away, because it'll show you what not to do in the future. That's it for me, I guess. That's
I have to agree. Inking is definitely like, I would think of it as a muscle, you know? So working on it every day and having it be kind of like something that you go back to and is part of like your routine with drawing is really important if you want to get more, I guess, like confident in your line work. I think it's also important to think of it casually too, you know, like if you're stressed out about it, put it more into a casual setting where you have less of the opportunity to use the whiteout, like, you know, just to kind of just like leave it as a mess and learn from that. I did a few exercises when I was practicing my inking, and it would be kind of like mimicking other artists and their line weight and how they got a certain effect and things like that, and that really helped me too. But yeah, that's for me, that's pretty much mostly sketchbook area. So definitely sketchbooks are very important. So.
I did an experiment a few years ago. It may help you. get a sketchbook just dedicated to nothing but drawing. Well, sorry, no drawings. It's just marks. A sketchbook just for mark making. And I labeled. So I took 15 brushes, and I labeled each brush, like, brush 1, 2 to whatever. And then to each page, I dedicated that same brush. I tried using, heavy ink, no ink, dry brush. I tried to hatch. I tried to do slow marks, long marks, over and over and over. And that became like my warm up before I would even think about drawing anything. It's almost like you're tuning your tools, you're figuring it out, and you use the back end. You're like, okay, let me go back to brush number 3, and then now I could start mixing it up. Now you have a library of reference that you've just done over time, and I would also label them by weeks. Like, this is when I started, this is 3 weeks later. Has my mark become more confident? Are the lines hatching getting closer? Are they getting more wide apart? Am I enjoying this? Do I need to get new brushes to try out new things? Same with nibs, textures. I also, what I ended up doing is I scanned those in, and then I ended up making those as textures, because they're just super abstract now at this point, where you can just drop them on an overlay layer. If you're doing some digital inking, you could create brushes out of those. And I thought that experiment worked really well, and I kind of just never really shared it, but I'm sharing it now. So if it's at your disposal to try this out, it might help. That's all I got.
A great idea. Drew, do you have any suggestions? Or do you?
I don't use a brush specifically, which I think is what the question was mostly addressed at. But as far as using a nib, I feel like when I started using a nib, and I actually started using a nib kind of young, which is maybe why I find it really intuitive to use at this point in my life. The reason is kind of elaborate, so I won't go into it. But I somehow found out that the editorial cartoonist of the Miami Herald, Jim Moran, used this kind of pen. So I was like, oh, I guess I should use that, because at the time I thought there would be like careers in political cartooning at that time. So anyway, I always used to draw with a nib, and this like as if it was, someone later said you draw with a nib like it's a brush, which I realized was like really bad. Like I would kind of like, every line would start really skinny, and then it would get really fat in the middle, and then it would get skinny again. And that's how all my lines looked. And it looked all right, sometimes, but it was bad. So I got this big old book from like 1900 or something called Rendering in Pen and Ink, which I didn't read through the whole thing, but I read through some of the introductory chapters, which kind of just gave a few very basic exercises about using a nib, which will show you, like, I don't remember, it was like a little chart with like maybe 20 different, lines you can make. Like try to make a line that starts skinny and gets fat in the middle and then skinny, or try to make one that's like skinny all the way down, or squiggly, or, it had a few different lines for you to just try to copy. And it was like really eye-opening for me. I mean, it's so obvious, but I was like, oh my God, like we can do all these things with this tool. And that kind of taught me to use the nib a little bit more delicately. I think I have a heavy hand, and I started kind of that way, as, just like gripping my pen too tight and doing these bad, stupid lines. So anyway, it kind of taught me to be a little more delicate with the nib. So Rendering with Pen and Ink, read the first couple chapters, maybe read the whole thing. It looks like if you read the whole thing, you'd be better at inking than I am by far. So that's what I could tell you.
Cool. That was awesome, Drew. Thanks. Speaking of awesome, this was an awesome presentation from everybody. Thank you so much for your presentations, Anna and Drew and Jayro and Eric. I am pasting in links to the web presences of all of the participants, and I'm going to share my screen because I've got a couple announcements to make. Yeah, thank you so much. This was really fantastic. Oops, here are the links also in the chat. And all of those links will also be in the description at the bottom of the YouTube video when I post it later this week. I wanted to let folks know that we are planning more events for Radiator Comics Studio. So be on the lookout for October events being announced soon. Every Friday, we host a drop-in open studio work session from 4 to 6 p.m. for you to take time to work on your comics. It's broken up into 4 20-minute quiet work sessions buffered by 10-minute breaks for socializing and water drinking. It's a lot of fun. It'll help you get some work done. You get to meet some people who are also making comics. You can join us or leave at any time during that time to fit your schedule. You can learn more about it at radiatorcomics.com/studio. Something I forgot to mention about our presenters is that they all make comics that you can purchase. So be sure to visit their websites and purchase their comics through them. Contact them through Instagram. I also wanted to mention that Radiator Comics will be virtually exhibiting at Cartoon Crossroads Columbus, also known as CXC, October 1st through the 4th. It's a great festival with a ton of awesome programming that weekend. Usually you have to go to Columbus, Ohio, which is a great city, to check it out, but you can see it online. So please do check it out. Also, in addition to Inktober and CXC, the month of October is also Mice Month, which will feature weekends of programming from the Massachusetts Independent Comics Expo. They're gonna be announcing a bunch of programming, including announcements of 30 Mice mini grant recipients who, in addition to funding to publish new works, are also being offered distribution through Radiator Comics. So be sure to look out for announcements from us and from Mice about their programming and how you can order these really awesome self-published comics. And then, of course, we always want to hear from you. So if you have programming suggestions or proposals, or you just want to say hi, my email address is neil@radiatorcomics.com. That's NEIL@radiatorcomics.com. We want to know who's making comics and who wants to make comics, and anything that's comics adjacent too is awesome and fun. So yeah, that's it. Thanks so much again to Eric and Anna and Jayro and Drew for presenting tonight. And thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope you have a great week. See you at Open Studio. Stay safe. Thank you. Good night.